to help the deserving working class, but not people that are on benefits, just because of that pushback, that ugly pushback from New Zealand. And I would say, Kamau is saying, I'm doing everything I can, but that's such a basic thing.
Well, it's just wrong. She has the money. She could spend it. Experts have told her she should. And the reason the government's not doing it is because they're afraid that middle New Zealand will go, oh, those poor people deserve it, those brown people, and because that's what we're talking about here, is a bunch of people go, they don't deserve my taxes. And frankly, the government needs to make the case, and there's a very strong one, actually using some of the language the National Party used to use under the previous leader, which was if you invest money and time and effort in improving the welfare, particularly of children, but people who are really struggling, particularly with high rents, then in the long run,
such a no-brainer.
You benefit so much. And one of the outcomes of the benefit cuts of the early 90s and this continual sinking lid in the government's spending relative to incomes on welfare is that our prisons are full, our kids are getting diabetes and skin infections. We have all sorts of social problems because 20, 30 years ago we cut benefits.
I'm just thinking you can't invite us back together because we keep agreeing on everything.
Entirely agree. I mean, because people are out there.
How boring for everybody.
People are out there will say, I mean, what a mess. It was a $5.5 billion injection into the sector. How
big is the economy?
What more do you want?
$300 billion. How much is the cost of hospitals and schools and prisons?
And food.
Multiple billions.
I mean, just the cost of food alone.
How much extra goes in New Zealand superannuation payments each year? You talk about $5 billion, okay? The numbers are increasing $5 to $10 billion every couple of years. The winter energy payments, for example, a whole bunch of people who are earning salaries,
people agree with you. Drew says, "Wow, your two guests are fantastic potential politicians." I won't go quite that far. But
don't go that far.
Why don't you give them a chance? This is the first tranche, is it not? And you never know what, as Professor Asher says. She actually said it's actually quite good. Professor, this paediatrician said it's actually a good first step. What's happening?
I'll go to the Welfare Advisory Working Group.
But she did say, I want to clarify that, she did say also that the government was sitting on its hands and just 3 of the 120 recommendations were picked up.
We had a Prime Minister who's elected and promised transformation. She's immensely popular and is refusing to use the government's balance sheet because she and the rest and others in the government and the Green Party actually made a dumb commitment to a stupid rule that no one in the financial markets cares about.
It's so interesting because those benefit cuts in the 1990s, right? I still remember the impact of that because I'm old enough to. And that everyone on benefits, it's such a massive hit and it's still reverberating and we've never addressed that, come back from that, tried to kind of remedy that in any way.
So what did Professor Asher said this video? She said what we need actually is a sudden big lift. And you'd agree with that,
$5 billion to start with.
All right, charming way to end a Friday, isn't it? But been a wonderful panel and great soundtrack choices. I'm off for next week. Mike Brew, who's in. Meanwhile, Bernard Hickey, Dr. Carla Miller, you've been wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Laura and Emil for putting the shows together. See us later. Have a great weekend.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, the jury considering the fate of the man accused of killing Grace Millane is 4 hours, 15 minutes into its deliberations. The trial judge's instruction to the 12, don't let your sympathy for the British backpacker intrude on your judgment. Green MP Marama Davidson rates the government's welfare reforms a 6 out of 10 so far. Prepare for a scorcher. A heatwave is forecast for most of the country over the weekend, and over the ditch, 40 degrees plus temperatures and dry winds fan Australia's bushfires. We asked Prince Charles if he was the one who got the Queen to stand down his brother Prince Andrew from royal duties, and Samoa looks to introduce a no jab, no school law.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A judge has reprimanded Gisborne District Council for what he calls its disgraceful oversight of forestry companies. The Japanese-owned company Dunedin, New Zealand, was today fined $152,000 in the Gisborne District Court after earlier pleading guilty to discharging contaminants. Ruth Hill reports.
Large amounts of forestry waste from the company's Waituna forest block washed into the tributaries of the Mangapoiki River during torrential rain in June last year, damaging properties and waterways. The Gisborne Herald reports damage only came to light as a result of Dunedin's self-reporting. The District Council's lawyer, Adam Hopkinson, said it was responsible for a large area and not well resourced. Judge Brian Dwyer said it was a disgrace the council failed to monitor the company. The judge said he'd even considered not awarding most of the fine to the District Council. However, he decided that would be unfair to ratepayers, who would have had to foot the bills. Ko Ruth Hill tēnei.
The jury is still out in the trial of the man accused of murdering Grace Millane. The 7 women and 5 men retired at 12:30. The 27-year-old man is charged with murdering Ms Millane in his apartment after a Tinder date last December. It's the Crown's case he strangled her to death. But defence lawyers say the British backpacker accidentally died after consensual choking during sex. Over 3 weeks, the jury has heard from about 40 witnesses called by both the Crown and defence. Ms Millane's parents, David and Gillian Millane, have been in court, supported by the police, for the entire trial. 4 property investors have been charged with fraudulently obtaining millions of dollars in home loans. The Serious Fraud Office alleges Brian Martin, Vicky Cotter, Sean Grant and Joshua Grant, all in their 50s, deceived banks into providing loans to purchase residential properties, mostly in Auckland. The accused have pleaded not guilty and have been remanded on bail until February next year. A journalist who has spent 7 years investigating New Zealand's Leaky buildings crisis says the cost to homeowners alone could be more than $47 billion. Peter Dyer, who has written a book about the problem called Rotonomics, says he's based the figure on a 2014 government report which estimated the number of leaky dwellings at 174,000. But he notes that doesn't include public buildings, including schools and hospitals. Mr Dyer says successive governments have failed to deal with the problem.
It's so big that people just, when they do want to talk about it, they just kind of metaphorically throw their hands up in the air and say, how can we fix this? It's too big. And governments certainly haven't been able to properly address it. I think part of the problem there is the 3-year election cycle.
Peter Dyer says structural change is needed to fix the problem, including curbing self-regulation by industry. Sweltering dry temperatures and possible heatwave conditions are being forecast for much of the country in coming weeks. The heatwave fuelling the devastating bushfires in Australia is drifting over the Tasman Sea this weekend. Parts of the South Island had a scorcher today, with Timaru hitting 29 degrees. Chris Brandolino from Niwa says the periods of high temperatures, in some places up to 12 degrees above their monthly average, will stick around for weeks.
I think overall the theme, or what will define the next, say, 10 to maybe even 14 days, will be the unusual warmth and, for many in New Zealand, unusual dryness.
Chris Brandolino says Hamilton, Inland Bay of Plenty and Canterbury and Wairarapa are set to be the hottest places, with also very little rain forecast. The prosecution has finished presenting evidence in the trial in Dunedin of Bernard Scanther, who denies murdering 16-year-old Amber Rose Rush last year. Over 3 weeks, the Crown has called 69 witnesses. Its case is that the 32-year-old former doctor fatally stabbed Miss Rush to stop her making claims he was molesting minors and offering money for sex. The defence says the prosecution's key witness, Bernard Scanther's former teenage friend, was the killer. The defence will open its case next week. Prison staff are referring to inmates by their first names and describing them as men in their care. It's part of a new strategy called Hokairangi, which aims to humanise the inmates. Anand Zaki reports.
The strategy, launched in August, looks at rethinking how the Department of Corrections provides for and interacts with inmates. A spokesperson for the Corrections Minister, Kelvin Davis, says despite the new strategy, staff are not required to call prisoners by their first names or as men in their care. Corrections staff are also to use the te reo word paihere for inmates, which means bundle. The minister's spokesperson says that idea came from staff at Tongariro prison. Ko anan zaki tēnei.
It's 5 minutes past 5. New Zealand are 87 for 2 in reply to England's first innings of 353 late on day 2 of the first cricket test at Bay Oval in Mount Maunganui. At the crease, it's skipper Kane Williamson on 41 and Ross Taylor on 10. The batsmen out are Tom Latham and Jeet Raval. England started the day at 241 for 4 but lost 4 wickets in the space of 18 runs before a 52-run 9th wicket stand bolstered their innings. The second oldest provincial rugby competition in New Zealand, Auckland's Mills Primary School Tournament, is to end. The tournament started in 1924 and was the second oldest rugby competition in New Zealand, behind only the Ranfurly Shield. Former All Blacks include the late Sir Colin Mead, Sir Michael Jones, Grant Fox and Kieran Reid have all played in the tournament. It is ending after a decision by the Northern Region Rugby Council to no longer hold age grade representative tournaments for under-15s. New Zealand's champion shot putter Dame Valerie Adams has made history by becoming one of the first active athletes to join the World Athletics Council as a full voting member. Adams has been elected as Deputy Chairperson of the Athletes Commission and will be one of the 2 athlete representatives on the council for the next 4 years. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, NZSO conductor Hamish McKeach selects the mixtape. Yes, I know I said that last week, but this week I'm right. Country Life is making gin the Reefton way with a bit of horopito for some added spice. Solar Rosa is the Friday Night Live act. And because this week's element is named after Thor, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to thunder and lightning on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for the whole of the North Island, also Marlborough and Nelson. Fine weather. Bulla, fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow with patchy drizzle morning and night. Westland rain developing in the south this evening. Occasional rain or drizzle further north tomorrow. Canterbury, fine at first. Nor'westerly gales for exposed parts of the high country easing tonight. Becoming cloudy about the plains tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, fine and warm tonight. A few showers developing. Some possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon and evening. Nor'westerly gales in exposed places severe in Southland, easing tonight. Fiordland rain, heavy and possibly thundery at times. Severe nor'westerly gales easing tonight. Chatham Islands, mainly fine tonight. Becoming cloudy tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The jury is still out in the trial of the man accused of murdering Grace Millane. The 27-year-old man who has name suppression has been on trial in the High Court at Auckland for the past 3 weeks. Today, Justice Simon Moore summed up the case to the jury of 7 women and 5 men before they retired to consider their verdict at lunchtime. In the past hour, the jury has returned to court to ask a question and have indicated to Justice Moore they are close to a verdict. Our reporter Sarah Robson has been covering the case and filed this story.
It's the Crown's case that the accused man strangled Grace Millane to death in his apartment in the City Life Hotel last December. But his defence says her death was an accident after he choked her during consensual rough sex. Summing up the case to the jury, Justice Moore said they must ignore any media reports they may remember about Ms Millane's disappearance.
It's critically important that you make your findings in this case solely on the evidence you heard in this courtroom.
Justice Moore said he was confident the jurors had followed the instructions he gave them at the beginning of the trial to not make their own inquiries online or on social media. He explained again why.
Media reports, including social media reports, are often inaccurate, incomplete, and not infrequently simply wrong. And it would be totally unfair of you to judge this case on things you may have heard, seen or read beyond the walls of this courtroom.
Justice Moore told the jury they must put their own feelings aside during their deliberations.
You must reach your verdict in this case uninfluenced by prejudice against or sympathy for anyone connected to this trial.
Justice Moore said it was natural to have sympathy for Grace Millane's family, but the jury couldn't let feelings intrude into their judgment. The same applied to any feelings they may have about the accused man's behaviour.
Sift the evidence as carefully and as neutrally and as objectively as you can.
Justice Moore told the jury that if they find the man guilty of murder, they don't need to go any further in their deliberations. If they find he did not, he said it's only then that they were able to consider manslaughter. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Sarah Robson, aho.
And our reporter Sarah Robson is at the High Court and joins me now. Sarah, in the past hour, the jury has come back to ask a question?
Yeah, that's right. Just after 4 o'clock today, the jury asked a question wanting to clarify what the wording meant in part of the question trail they are considering in their deliberations. Now, they asked what a question meant when it said, quote, when he applied pressure, whether it was when pressure was first applied to Ms Millane's neck or at any point during the choking. Now, Justice Moore told the jury that when he applied pressure wasn't limited to the beginning of this time period, that it could be at any time during the application for force leading to Ms Millane's death. Now, the jury indicated that it is coming quite close to reaching a verdict. So they've been deliberating now for about 4.5 hours. So we are expecting that they will continue their deliberations. It's obviously gone beyond 5 o'clock now, so they are staying on late to continue deliberations on a verdict.
Thank you, Sarah. That's Sarah Robson, who is outside the High Court in Auckland. And if there are any developments in that case, we will bring them to you. Questions about his brother dogged Prince Charles on his visit to Christchurch today. The Prince's royal tour this week has coincided with an unravelling scandal back home about his brother Prince Andrew's relationship to convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Prince Andrew has since been stood down from royal duties, with British media reporting that came after a request from Charles. Our reporter Logan Church tried to get clarity from Prince Charles, our future king, as to what was going on.
Your Royal Highness, did you ask the Queen to have Prince Andrew stood down from royal duties?
So do you think he should speak to US investigators?
Stony silence and a disapproving glare was all that Prince Charles gave media today when asked about his brother. His trip began today at Tuahiwi Marae, north of Christchurch. He then travelled south to Cashmere High School. And putting all international scandal aside, this visit was considered by many to be one of the most important stops of the royal tour. The school lost 2 students in the mosque attacks. Prince Charles passed along his condolences to a school assembly, attended also by the Prime Minister.
It seems to me that the only possible remedy for such understandable feelings of despair is hope. Hope that love will triumph over hate, that understanding might dispel suspicion, and that the strength of our communities can prevail against all efforts to divide us.
Outside the school gates, 92-year-old Beverly Savage was hoping to see Prince Charles as he came out.
Well, I just thought, I knew they were coming this way, so I thought, well, we'll come down here and sit and wait and see what happens. So that's what we're doing.
Prince Charles and Camilla then travelled to Tūranga, the Central Library, to learn about the multi-million-dollar partially taxpayer-funded effort to restore the Anglican Cathedral. His mother, the Queen, is head of the Anglican Church, and today it was announced Prince Charles would become the royal patron of the cathedral. He also made a donation. But some royal well-wishers outside believe the unfolding scandal with Prince Andrew back home was casting a shadow over this week's royal visit.
A shame that it might influence a tour to New Zealand for Prince Charles and Camilla when they're obviously doing good deeds and coming over here, and it takes away from that, doesn't it?
Do you think it was right for Prince Andrew to be stood down?
Yes. And I think it was silly of him to go on television.
After visiting Tūranga, the royal duo went on a tour of the cathedral site before meeting members of the public. About 500 people gathered in Cathedral Square. Sue and Greg, who were visiting from Canada, said the timing of Prince Andrew's interview, which has been labelled by British media as a train wreck, was poor.
Very unfortunate for him, and yes, he's not doing a great job of cleaning it up either, but he's Prince Andrew, you know.
Yes, Families all have skeletons.
Yeah, he may be the one, yeah. Yeah, very unfortunate. Andrew's going to be the problem. It doesn't matter where Charles goes.
Meanwhile, this couple felt sorry for another member of the royal family.
We feel sorry for the Queen. Well, she doesn't need a hassle at 93, does she, really? Yes, so no.
We saw The Crown last night. It's history repeating itself.
You think
so? It is.
Nothing's new, really. Nothing's new.
The royal couple finished their tour of Christchurch at Lincoln University, where the Prince made an address about the state of the environment. He will head to Kaikoura tomorrow, while Camilla will spend a bit more time exploring Christchurch before heading home. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
It is 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you're just listening to that piece, you can go online and see Logan's item video package, the pictures there of Charles and Camilla in Christchurch. And if you're just joining us, the update on the jury trial of the man accused of the murder of Grace Millane, the jury has indicated it is not far from a verdict in the trial. At 4:10, the jury asked a question wanting to clarify what the wording meant in part of the question trail they are considering with their deliberations. They asked what a question meant when it said when he applied pressure, whether it was when pressure was first applied to Ms Millane's neck or at any point during the period of pressure. Justice Moore told the jury that when he applied pressure wasn't limited to the beginning of this time period and it could be at any time during the application for force leading to Ms Millane's death. That question was asked at 4:10 and at that time the jury indicated it was not far from reaching a verdict, and we will bring you any update as it happens. A union for prison officers believes taking a softer approach to dealing with inmates, including using their first names, is upsetting the prison hierarchy and leading to more guards being assaulted. The Corrections Association, or CANS, says prison officers are being encouraged to call prisoners by their first or last names as part of a shift in the justice system aimed at treating inmates in a more human way. Some prisons are using the Māori word paihere instead of inmate. It means to bundle or tie together. I asked CANS President Alan Whiteley how he would address an inmate.
We generally call prisoners, or refer to them as prisoners, and use their surname. Now, corrections are moving towards the term of people in our care, paihere, manihere, and a few other words that aren't actually in the Act.
So what's your specific problem with calling them people in our care, for example? Because they are, aren't they?
Well, they're in our custody first. We definitely care for people that we have in our custody, and we've got to treat them with humanely and with dignity, but predominantly they're in our custody. There's a warrant that holds them in prison.
It's just a turn of phrase, though, isn't it? Would it hurt to call them people in your care?
Well, if we have a look at the assault stats for the last 12 months, they've gone through the roof. So something's changed in the last 12 months, and corrections officers are getting assaulted at an alarmingly high rate.
What do you think's changed, Alan?
Well, I think we've softened our approach to prisoners.
Just in your language or in other ways?
Oh, I think in other ways. We're trying to make sure that definitely the prisoners are in the forefront of everything we do, but in the forefront of everything we do over the top of safety.
So, how does calling an inmate by their first name, are you advised to call them by their first names?
That's what they're recommending. So that's what it does, is it breeds it breeds familiarity with the person. So a prison needs to operate on a hierarchical control when things go wrong, and you've got to make sure you're maintaining that all of the time.
Can you not maintain order and call someone by their first name?
It can get difficult. You start to breach over to the point where are you friends with this person, or are you actually there to make sure that they maintain the law and discipline while they're in a prison?
So what is your preference? Is it to call someone simply by their surname?
It's to follow what the Act says. The Act terms the person in custody in prison as a prisoner. If there needs to be changes, then change the Act.
So just to be clear, if you were wanting to give an instruction to an inmate, would you go, excuse me, inmate, excuse me, prisoner, or would you say, use their last name?
If you knew what their last name is, you'd use their last name. Otherwise, you'd call them prisoner.
Isn't that, well, some people would argue that's dehumanising.
Yeah, they may do, but it's what they're defined as under the Act at the moment.
What specific issue do you have with calling them by their first name? How do you think that alters the hierarchy of the prison?
Well, that's generally what you do with your friends.
Or people you might be wanting to give instructions to? It's a way of identifying the individual that you're speaking to specifically?
But there's a possibility of that. I mean, there's no... The instruction that's been given out is it's up to staff if they want to do that. A lot of staff don't want to do it.
You mentioned this word paihere. How has that come into the language used in the prison, and where has it come from?
I think it first came out of Tongariro prison. I'm unsure of the actual origins of it.
And again, what is your understanding about what this word means, and what's your issue with using that?
The issue is if somebody charges, to charge somebody in a prison, first thing they have to be is a prisoner. And that's per the Act. If somebody charges somebody for being a paihere at a particular prison and then the offence, that charge may not stand.
But Te Reo Māori is an official language of this country, so are you sure it wouldn't stand up in court?
Like, the Act talks about a prisoner, so...
But the prisoner is still a prisoner, though, aren't they? Regardless of whether you call them by their first name or their last name or another common phrase.
Yeah, we used to have the term inmate in the Act, and that was changed to prisoners, and we were all instructed that we could no longer use the term inmate in the charge because they were prisoners, and we had to meet compliance with the Act.
Can you explain to us what paihere means?
No, I can't. I don't. I do not know what it means.
Have you been told by the Department of Corrections to use this word?
They use that word in a lot of their official correspondence.
Have they explained to you what it means?
No.
Have you asked?
No. Like I say, we're happy with whatever they use as long as it's consistent with the Act. If that's what they want to use and they put it in the Act, we've got no issue with it whatsoever. We just don't want people using one term in one place and then not being able to use it in another place and legal paperwork falling over.
So I suppose the Waitangi Tribunal and the Justice Minister has talked about treating prisoners in a respectful way. So are you prepared to change the way that you refer to prisoners if there's no legal issues attached to it? You refer to the Act there, but if you were able to call them by their first names or by some other terminology and it wasn't going to have an effect on their legal status, would you be comfortable with that?
Yeah, we'd obviously be comfortable with that, but the other thing that needs to happen too is corrections staff are getting assaulted at an alarmingly high rate. So we're talking about us respecting prisoners. Let's see some respect coming back from them. The reoffending starts in jail. Stop the offending you're doing in prison by assaulting prison staff.
Alan, do you think calling prisoners by their first names is fuelling the assault rate?
Well, we don't know what's completely fueling the assault rate, but in the last 12 months it's markedly increased. And
so what do you think that means in terms of calling prisoners by different names? Do you think there's any connection?
It's around about 12 months ago a lot of things changed where we started to soften the approach that we took to prisoners.
And you think softening language is part of that?
It could well be. Like I say, it's unknown at this point, but we want to stem the rate of assaults that are happening in prisons at the moment.
And that was Alan Whitley, who is from the Corrections Association, talking there about, calling inmates by their first and last names. Let us know what you think about that. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Should we call prisoners by their first and last names rather than a generic inmate prisoner? Is it more humanising, or should we stick with the old ways? As Samoan authorities battle the country's growing measles emergency, the government's already looking beyond the immediate crisis at hand, with plans to make it compulsory for children to be vaccinated. Otherwise, they won't be allowed to attend school in 2020. Meanwhile, families are in mourning as at least 16 deaths have been linked to the measles outbreak, and authorities say there is now just under 1,200 suspected cases. Authorities fear the worst is yet to come, and they've launched a mass immunisation campaign to address the country's low vaccination rate. The ABC's Liam Fox is in the capital, Apia.
In a village outside Apia, Eseta Meki will bury her youngest son. 2-year-old Meki died on Monday, not long after his mother took him to hospital with a fever and a rash.
When we got to the hospital gate, his body had gone limp and I could feel that his heart was beating very slow. The nurses tried their best, but at the end they told me they couldn't save him.
Ms. Meki says her 3 other older sons have been vaccinated against measles, but her youngest was not.
He didn't get vaccinated because our family is very poor.
Local health authorities say 2/3 of Samoans are not vaccinated against measles. That low rate meant that when the highly infectious disease arrived from New Zealand last month, it spread rapidly. Ms. Meki says another child living nearby has also died from measles. People are living in fear, she says, and she's urging other parents to get their children vaccinated.
My advice to parents and people is please take good care of your children.
Vaccinations are now mandatory after the Samoan government declared a state of emergency and launched a mass immunisation campaign. Hundreds of people turned up at the Samoa Red Cross compound in Apia to get free shots for their children.
Miguel Williams, John Williams, line up here, please.
Malga Karita brought 2 of her grandchildren who've already been vaccinated, but she wanted them to get booster shots. She says the epidemic has created a sense of fear in the community.
They're feeling panicked because of this getting worse, because the last time this measles was here in Samoa, it's not worse like this.
But others aren't so concerned.
No, actually not. I'm not worried about it.
Tusinga Farao Williams cradles 2 infant grandchildren who've just received their first measles vaccinations. But only, she says, because it's now mandatory.
I have faith in God and God is protecting my children. Like, I have results, but it's because everybody else have to do it and we have to follow.
And that's Liam Fox with that report. And just to update you on the situation, if you're just joining us with the trial of the man accused of murdering Grace Millane, the jury's now about, 4 hours and 45 minutes into its deliberations. They came back at about 4:10 this afternoon with a question. They wanted to clarify with the judge the wording of a question that is part of a trail that they need to work their way through in their deliberations. The question they asked was around the term pressure and the accused applying pressure to Miss Millane's neck. Now, Justice Moore has clarified that question for the jury, and they indicated to him that they were not far from a verdict. So they continue to deliberate beyond the normal closing time business hours at the court. We will bring you any developments as they come to hand. Sweltering dry temperatures and possible heatwave conditions are being forecast for much of the country in coming weeks. The heatwave fueling the devastating bushfires in Australia is drifting over the Tasman this weekend, and it's set to be a scorcher. And according to NIWA, the record temperatures this month are an indication of climate change. Hamish Cardwell reports.
Summer's technically still more than a week away, but tell that to Timaru. It got up to 29 degrees today. Met Service forecaster Andy Best says the balmy temperatures for much of the South Island today are well above the norm.
On average, this time of the year, around places like Christchurch and Hokitika and Blenheim and Invercargill, temperatures between 16 and 19 degrees Celsius, whereas today we're looking at temperatures in Blenheim, for example, of 28 Celsius, Ashburton 27, Dunedin 26.
Chris Brandolino from NIWA says the periods of high temperatures, in some places up to 12 degrees above their monthly average, are to stick around for weeks.
I think overall the theme, or what will define the next, 10 to maybe even 14 days, will be the unusual warmth and, for many in New Zealand, unusual dryness.
Hamilton, Inland Bay of Plenty in Canterbury, and the Wairarapa are set to be the hottest places, with the rest of the country likely to get well above average temperatures. Mr Brandolino says it's very hot in Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, Eastern Waikato, Coromandel and Northland, and there's very little rain forecast. He says it's possible parts of the country could reach heatwave levels. That's 5 consecutive days at 5 degrees above average. That's ideal for pleasure seekers, but not so great for farmers.
Conversely, what we find as ideal weather, that lemonade is probably a bit sour as a lemon for the farmers because we're going to find multiple days of dry weather. And unless there is irrigation, that could pose a real, could be a real headache.
Fire and emergency spokesperson John Rasmussen says the fire threat level across the country is about average for this time of year, but that could change.
That next 10-day period of having considerably higher temperatures, and probably along with that will be lower relative humidities, and there'll be forecast less rain. I think that will certainly spike the fire dangers up across the country.
He says people should be careful lighting fires or using machinery that can cause sparks in areas with scrub and tussock. Most of the country has already had some sweltering temperatures this month, with 2 top 10 November temperature records, 33 degrees in Cheviot and 34 degrees in the Bay of Plenty, happening in the first days of the month. Mr. Brandolino says hitting records so early in the month is an ominous sign.
What normally would happen in terms of unusual warmth on the 3rd week of November or the 4th week of November just got bumped up to the first few days of November. When they start happening, a top 5, a top 9, a top 3, and the very, very few first days of the month, I think that is climate change impacting.
NIWA will put out its detailed summer forecast late next week. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell, tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the jury in the Grace Millane trial has returned to ask a question and have indicated that they are close to a verdict. Now, we have a team of reporters at the High Court and will bring you any developments as soon as they happen. The Greens say they will have failed if benefits aren't increased during this election term, and Stewart Island's going green on the electricity front, why it's also going to be easier on the pocket. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard so far on the show this evening. You can text us on 2101. Our email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, or you can tweet us at checkpointrnz. Let's go to Susanna now with the headlines.
The jury has indicated it is close to reaching a verdict in the trial of the man accused of murdering Grace Millane after retiring 5 hours ago. The 27-year-old is charged with murdering the British backpacker after a Tinder date last December. The jury has asked Justice Moore to clarify a question relating to the accused application of pressure to Ms Millane's neck. The defence says her death was an accident following consensual choking during sex. A judge has rebuked Gisborne District Council for what he said was disgraceful oversight of the forestry company Duke in New Zealand. In the Gisborne District Court today, Judge Brian Dwyer fined the Japanese-owned company $152,000 for discharging contaminants from Waituna Forest Block after heavy rain in June last year. The Serious Fraud Office has charged 4 property investors with fraudulently obtaining millions of dollars in home loans. It alleges Brian Martin, Vicky Cotter, Sean Grant and Joshua Grant deceived banks into providing loans to buy residential properties, mostly in Auckland. The accused, all in their 50s, have pleaded not guilty and been remanded on bail until February next year. A journalist investigating the Leaky building crisis estimates the cost to homeowners alone could exceed $47 billion. Peter Dyer says he's based the figure on a 2014 government report, which estimates the number of leaky dwellings at 174,000, not including public buildings. Mr Dyer says successive governments have failed to deal with the problem and structural changes needed, including curbing self-regulation. The Otahuhu College principal says he trusts his students and did not instruct them not to go to an organised inter-school brawl this afternoon. Extra police have been sent to Mission Bay in Auckland after disorder last week with dozens of school students, including some arrests. Police found out there were plans for another meet-up today. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time for business now with Madison Reedy. Madison, E-Road has reported its first half-year result, and there's a bit of a twist, and you'll get to that. But first off, what is E-Road?
I knew you were going to ask that first off the bat. So E-Road is a transport software company, particularly for transportation management. So that's things like fleets of trucks. So that's what they do. So they made a smaller half-year loss of $106,000. Now that's actually smaller than their last year loss, which was $3.4 million. So a bit of an improvement there. Now its sales rose 35% to $38.5 million. Now, E-Road is a really high growth phase company, and most of their money that they make, so those millions of dollars worth of revenue and sales, they reinvest that into its company to help it grow in other markets, not just New Zealand, also Australia and North America as well. Now, here's the twist. It said with its result today that it's actually considering dual listing on the Australian Stock Exchange so that it would have a foot in both sides of the Tasman and be listed on both markets. Now, it says that it's considering doing that because it's getting a lot of interest from overseas investors who can't always buy as much New Zealand stock as they'd like to, so they would like to buy it from the ASX instead. Now, being listed on both markets, being what's called dual listed, essentially gives companies more shareholders on both sides of the Tasman to raise money on, and this is particularly common with growth companies. You'll remember that Xero, the accounting software company, did this as well, but then they awkwardly ditched us for Australia, and now they're only listed on the ASX. So hopefully E-Road doesn't do that too.
Okay, so in other news, New Zealand's economy isn't looking so bad compared to the rest of the OECD, apparently.
Yeah, this is the OECD's latest reckoning on the global economy, and it says that it is unstable. It says that global economic growth has fallen down to 2.9%. That's from 3%. And the rate that it's moving at now is the slowest level of growth that we've seen since the global financial crisis in 2008. Now, it expects that the global economy, that growth there is going to stick around 3% for the next 2 years, so nothing good will be happening there anytime soon. Now, in its estimates of growth across the 7 major economies, it said that, well, the US is holding up okay, as is France. They're doing all right, but the rest not so much. Canada's slowing, Japan is slowing, and Japan is also under this huge big black cloud of enormous government debt too. Germany's trade is suffering, as is their manufacturing industry too, which is, most of their economy because they make so many beautiful cars. Italy is weak, and gosh, no one can guess what's going to happen in Britain these days. But when it came to New Zealand, things were slightly more optimistic. The OECD said that things here are more stable. They expect growth here to stay around 2.5% this year and next year, although they did have some warning signals for us, specifically around the expectations for our exports and also consumption, being consumer spending, to drop off. One of the most concerning things, though, is that the OECD said about the world economy is that it's heading towards, quote, prolonged stagnation. They specifically pointed the finger at the lack of government spending in all of the countries around the world. Now, interestingly, that is something that we're seeing here at home too. Our central bank, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, has itself pointed the finger at our government for its lack of fiscal stimulus and not spending enough on infrastructure and things like that. Now, on this topic, the OECD said, and I'll quote here, "We need urgent coordinated political action to restore confidence, boost inclusive growth and raise living standards. Global trade is stagnating and is dragging down economic activity in almost all major economies. Policy uncertainty is undermining investment and future jobs and incomes." And they said that risks of even weaker growth remain high, including from an escalation of the good old trade conflicts, geopolitical tensions, and also the possibility of a sharper than expected downturn in China's economy. Now, we will hear from our central bank, the Reserve Bank, next week about their concerns about our little local economy. The Reserve Bank is dropping its biannual, I should say, financial stability report on Wednesday. And the last one that they dropped this year, they only dropped 2 a year every 6 months, was in May. And in that, they raised some concerns about the high level of household debt and also dairy farm debt, which they're particularly concerned about. They also spoke about unaffordable insurance. And they also mentioned back in May that the loan-to-value ratio restrictions, which is a measure placed on banks to ensure that they don't take too many risky mortgages on, they said that in May that was suitable and appropriate for now, but things in the property market have changed, particularly in Auckland, with some price and value growth dropping off there, so they may look to ease those. We'll have to wait and see next week.
OK, let's take a quick spin around the markets.
The NZX Top 50 Index fell just 0.1% tonight, so that's a fall of 12 points to close the week at 10,946. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 64 US cents, 94.3 to the Aussie, 49.6 British pence. And I'll add in here too that the Business 2 Cents Worth podcast, it's a cause for celebration this week. So they are talking about the New Zealand Stock Exchange's 150th anniversary.
And you can download that from where you would get all your usual podcasts, can't
Wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Madison. That's Madison Reedy with our Friday business update. The Greens co-leader, Marama Davidson, says her party will have failed if it doesn't get baseline benefits increased this term. The government is this week pointing to new figures on its $5.5 billion families package as proof that it's on track to lift up to 74,000 children out of poverty by 2021. But Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni won't say if or when the government will implement its own welfare advisory group's recommendations, including increasing baselines for benefits. Overhauling the welfare system was included in the Green Party's confidence and supply agreement with Labour. Today I spoke to Marama Davidson about how she thinks that's going and started by asking, out of 10, what mark would she give the government for their performance?
I would say 6, 7.
And how do you feel about that?
I know that we need to prioritise increasing core benefits. People simply don't have enough to live their lives with dignity, and that's something we need to act urgently on.
So when you say urgently, by when?
The incomes have been kept inadequate for decades and through successive governments, in fact, Lisa, so this is ASAP. What that means is we need to put the legislation in place to raise those incomes.
Because speaking to the Minister on this program, she will give no commitment to raising benefits. Are you at loggerheads over this?
Oh, we're very clear that lifting core benefits, making sure people have enough to make ends meet, is something that needs to happen ASAP. It hasn't happened yet, and so that's definitely a question for the other parties. We're very clear, Greens are very clear on what we need to do.
So what has the Minister told you about this? Is she keen to do it this term or not?
Look, I want to say that Minister Carmel Sepuloni gets it. That I'm very clear of. She understands her background, her community work, her constituency. She gets that we need to see benefits and core benefit levels increased.
So who is the handbrake here then?
Again, we're working closely with the Minister to see how we can get this done. And, you know, it hasn't happened yet. That's a bigger question for all three political parties in government.
So why? Why hasn't it happened yet? If you're so determined about it and you say that the Minister gets it, why hasn't it happened yet? And why is there no commitment to make it happen this term?
I simply say to people, if we want to see it happen for sure and ASAP, we're going to need to see more Green MPs because this is a very clear position for us. I can talk about what we want, what we know people need us to do to
hang on
increase
a minute,
incomes.
and I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but that's an important point you make there. Have you resigned yourself to the fact that you're not going to get this in this term? You're talking about more Green MPs. That means another election. That means another term. That sounds like resignation.
We haven't given up. No, we haven't and will not give up. So we continue to work across ministers and with Minister Sepuloni to see this happen. We want to see something definitely this term. Absolutely, Lisa.
Is New Zealand First the fly in the ointment on this issue?
I will be really clear, that is a question for them. I am simply telling people we know what needs to be done. We want to ensure everyone has enough.
Why won't you
it hasn't happened, and so that's for the other parties to talk to.
Why won't you be upfront with voters about what's going on here and what the barrier is to making this happen? What is the barrier?
I think that's a fair question, and I think we're being very clear on what the Greens want. It hasn't happened. I think the people can work out, who it is that really wants to push this through, and so I am being quite upfront about it.
I can't work it out, so could you tell me? What is the barrier?
the Green Party are clear this needs to happen ASAP. People need this to happen. It hasn't happened yet. We are 3 political parties. We haven't yet had that consensus, Lisa. Yes, that's very clear.
So is Labor in agreement with you on this particular issue or not? Yes or no?
This is a confidence and supply agreement, and we haven't yet been able to see incomes lifted, but we are continuing to work on it, Lisa.
Why don't you just say that New Zealand First is the one that doesn't want it, if that's true?
I'm here to talk about what the Greens stand for. I agree that people have a right to understand where political parties are at. I do think that's a question for them.
You're
I'm
here as
very
a
clear
government
what the Greens
partner.
stand for.
You're here as a government partner. So let me put it another way then. Can you define overhaul for me? What's your idea of an overhaul?
That people can live with dignity, and the incredible welfare expert advisory group termed an overhaul meaning that it is whakamana tangata, it is people living with dignity. At the moment, incomes are not enough for people to live with dignity, and they were clear that we need to prioritise raising incomes.
Okay, so that is the commitment you have in your agreement, your confidence and supply agreement, that the welfare system will be overhauled. You don't have that yet, and that is a commitment for this term.
Yes.
So my question is, to achieve the goal of an overhaul, would you need to see baseline benefits go up this term?
Yes, we are clear.
So if you don't get that, you have failed and you haven't got your share of the government deal.
We're working on that. We do need to see something this term, Lisa, and that's what we're working on right now.
Carmel Sepuloni, when she came on Checkpoint, seemed to be suggesting that there is work going on behind the scenes and conversations are being had. What are those conversations? You must be party to them.
There is always work going on behind the scenes. Of course, Lisa, I think people will understand that we can't share all the details of those conversations, that I don't want to compromise the work that we do in a stage that is too early, but I do need to let people know we are fighting hard to see a welfare system that treats people with dignity, including lifting core benefits.
How can you expect people to support you when you will not be clear about what they can expect, what's coming?
I understand the need out there, and we've been very clear that we understand, the Greens understand the need out there, and I will be clear with people. We want to see incomes lifted. The welfare advised between 12% to 47% increase, and I can be very clear with people that that's what we want to see. We want to see that recommendation put in place. I can be clear that we are working solidly on putting that through right now.
And we're ending that interview with Marama Davidson early. The jury has returned in the case of the man accused of murdering Grace Millane. He has been found guilty of murder. Just to repeat that, the 27-year-old man on trial for the murder of Grace Millane has been found guilty this evening. I think we're going to go shortly to our reporter who's down at the High Court. Do we have her on the line? We are still waiting for her to come out of court. But that man, the 27-year-old accused, has been found guilty by the jury that has been deliberating. Well, it's coming up to 5 hours now. And I think Sarah Robson is with us now from outside the High Court in Auckland. No, we still don't have her, but we will keep you posted as soon as we have more details about that. The jury has just returned. As we said earlier, they came back at about 4:10 this afternoon and asked the judge a question. They indicated that they were very close to a verdict. Now they have come back with that verdict. They started deliberating at around 12:45 this afternoon. So we will keep you up to date and cross to our reporter as soon as she's able to leave the courtroom there. It is about 12 minutes away from 6, and this is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. We do have our reporter on the line now. I believe it's Sarah Robson who is joining us. Sarah has been covering this case for a number of weeks now. Obviously, the key question was whether this was murder or it was an accident during a consensual sexual act. Sarah is with us now. Sarah, can you just bring us up to date? What's happened?
Yeah, we have just had the verdict delivered by the jury. The man has been found guilty of murdering Grace Millane. Now, Ms. Millane's parents were holding hands in the public gallery as they waited for that verdict to be delivered. And Mrs. Millane, Gillian Millane, Grace Millane's mother, she wept as that verdict, in the moments after that verdict was handed down, and held her husband. Now, the accused man, he appeared emotionless as that verdict was handed down, and left the courtroom fairly promptly.
Were there many people in the public gallery when the jury returned?
The public gallery wasn't as full as it has been for a lot of this week. At times during this trial, it has been standing room only and absolutely packed. Now, I should also mention that the jury spent about 5 hours deliberating on their verdict this afternoon before coming back with that guilty verdict.
And Justice Moore, who is the judge in this trial, did he say anything after that verdict was returned?
He convicted the man of murder, and he told the jury that this has been a difficult case for them, and they will be excused from jury duty for 7 years.
Are we expecting, the family of Grace Millane to speak this evening at all?
We are expecting a statement from Grace Millane's father, David Millane, outside court, probably very shortly.
Just remind us the choices that they had here, the jury, in terms of the way that the defence had couched this versus the prosecution. Can you just talk us through that, Sarah?
Yeah, so it was the Crown's case that the accused man had strangled Ms. Millane in his apartment at the City Life Hotel. Now, it was the defence that was their case. They said that this was a case of rough sex gone wrong. Now, the Crown called almost 40 witnesses over this 3-week trial, including a pathologist who determined that the cause of her death was pressure to her neck. We also heard evidence from other women who had met up with the accused man on dates, including one woman who said that she had been suffocated while performing oral sex. We've also heard evidence about Google searches that the accused man made in the early hours of the 2nd of December. So these were the Google searches about things like Waitakere Ranges and hottest fire. And yesterday, again during the closing addresses, Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey showed the jury the 7 explicit photos that were taken of Ms. Millane after she died.
And so in the end, they have accepted the prosecution's version of events. You mentioned the 27-year-old accused who still has name suppression. How was he in court?
He appeared emotionless as that verdict was handed down, and very quickly exited with his corrections escorts from the dock.
Any word from the defence team as yet?
Not as yet. We are just waiting to hear more from them as people leave the courtroom.
Thank you, Sarah. That is Sarah Robson, who has been covering the trial of the man accused of murdering Grace Millane. He has been found guilty this afternoon after about 5 hours of deliberation from the jury. They have accepted, obviously, the Crown's case that he had murderous intent or reckless disregard for Grace Millane, the British backpacker who was killed in December of last year. And that 27-year-old has now been convicted, as Sarah said, left the court emotionless. And we're standing by for the Millane family who have been at court during this trial, who are expected to make a statement this evening, and we will bring that to you as soon as it is to hand. And in another court case, the prosecution has finished its evidence in the murder trial of former Dunedin doctor Vinod Scantha. The 32-year-old denies killing 16-year-old Amber Rose Rush in February last year. During the past 3 weeks, the Crown called on 69 witnesses. Today, Timothy Brown was in the High Court to hear Mr Scantha's 45-minute interview with the police.
On February the 3rd, 2018, Amber Rose Rush was found dead. The following night, the police took Vinod Scantha into custody. In a 45-minute police interview played to the court, he spoke to Detective Wayne O'Connell, at first downplaying his involvement with the teen.
Never actually had a close relationship with her, even as a friend or anything. It was always other people around when I saw Amber. Not much more I can say about that, really. She was just sort of a friend, you know. I was never really close to Amber at all.
That doesn't marry with other witnesses' evidence. One said Mr. Scanther was fascinated with her, and others spoke of him offering up to $20,000 to have sex with her. Mr. Scanther detailed his falling out with Miss Rush to the police.
According to John, she put up some nasty things on Instagram about me, which I didn't really care for, but it doesn't bother me, to be honest. So I just told her, stop doing that, or just leave me alone, whatever.
What was the posting she posted about?
I don't have Instagram, so I don't really know word for word what it was. Something like I'm a creep or something, which it's hard for me to say I'm not, obviously. It's definitely not a creep.
Friends of Miss Rush say she claimed she awoke on one occasion to find Mr. Scanther's hand down her pants. Mr. Scanther told the detective he genuinely has no recollection of such an incident, but he thinks he was very drunk at the time. After that, she cut contact with him.
I was like, okay, that's fine. I shouldn't really be hanging out with kids anyway.
In the police interview, Mr. Scanther says he's unconcerned by the allegations or Miss Rush posting them on social media. Detective O'Connell reveals he's seen message exchanges between the pair, and he thinks Mr. Scanther became aware of the social media posts on Friday, the day of Miss Rush's death. Mr. Scanther responds she's been making all sorts of claims, and other mutual friends say they don't believe her.
It doesn't really bother me, honestly. It's fine, whatever, She has a history of relationships with terrible guys. One guy even broke her arm. And I've been there to try and help her, and so, I don't know, she turned against me, and it just didn't bother me at all.
Earlier in the interview, Mr. Scanther questioned whether it was suicide, and during his evidence, Mr. O'Connell said he was asking about the partner of Miss Rush's mother on his way to the police station. Mr. O'Connell then tells Mr. Scanther the police can trace people using their phones. He asks him where he was on Friday. Mr. Scanther explains he picked up his teenage friend, the prosecution's key witness with name suppression, and they drove around before going back to his house. Mr. Scanther then remembers going to the beach. The detective says, Blackhead Quarry? Mr. Scanther agrees that sounds right.
What are we doing there?
Oh, he just wanted to show me a nice spot.
Mr. Scanther tells Detective O'Connell his friend wanted to show him a lookout, sometime after midnight. The Crown says he was disposing of Miss Rush's phone. Mr. Scanther becomes more defensive in the interview.
Are you suggesting I did something?
Well, tell me about that.
I think it's absurd. What kind of motive would I have to do something like that?
The Crown says because Miss Rush threatened to go to his bosses at Dunedin Hospital and the police about her claims. On Tuesday, the court heard the accused was on a final warning after showing up at work in July 2017 while off duty and after drinking alcohol and treating a patient. His job was only saved because he lied about his mother's death. The defence will open its case next week. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Stewart Island will be moving from diesel to wind power thanks to a $3 million grant from the Provincial Growth Fund. The islanders currently rely on diesel-powered generators for their electricity and pay about 3 times as much as mainlanders for it. Political reporter Charlie Drever spoke to Southland District Councillor and Stewart Island resident Bruce Ford about what this will mean for locals.
We're attempting to be more sustainable as such, and that's certainly part of that progress to just use a bit of independence. We're relying on other factors of diesel cost and supply and all those things, so hopefully it will manage our cost a bit. We don't know what's going to happen to fossil fuels, and we have to do our bit for climate change and all those things.
I saw that people on Stewart Island are paying, as much as 3 times more than those on the mainland for power. What kind of impact do those extra costs have on local residents?
Well, that's a considerable impediment to local around the community. We don't use electricity or water heating like you would other parts of the country, and we tend to use a wood fire to heat our water and LPG for cooking, and we do all sorts of alternatives for electricity, and whilst our bills are 3 times dearer, we do skimp and use other means of heating, so it's not just a power bill. We In effect, if we had cheaper electricity or more of it or more sustainable, we would act a bit different. So we wouldn't then need to import so much LPG, or we do import coal and diesel. A lot of houses run on direct-fired diesel heating, so there's many changes that might happen in that respect.
What about impact on business? Do you think that businesses will show more of an interest in Stewart Island once this alternative to generating electricity is created?
Yes, it's because of the impediment on financial performance. That people are very cautious about having a business around here. In fact, the fish processing and some of those things are certainly declined over many years because of the sheer cost, and processing would tend to go to somewhere where the power was cheaper. So business-wise, and certainly the tourist industry is, it takes a chunk out of your ability, and it consequently changes the cost to visitors. So you would expect that somewhere along the line the finances will improve and the visitor experience, I won't say it'll get cheaper, but certainly we can give a better service because we won't be so mean with the electricity.
No.
And that was local Stewart Island District Councillor Bruce Ford. We are standing by for the Millane family, who are expected to have a press conference.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei ātaua tēnei. The man accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Millane has been found guilty. The victim's mother gasped and began crying in the public gallery as the unanimous guilty verdict was read out in the High Court in Auckland. The 27-year-old accused stood motionless in the dock. We cross now to the High Court in Auckland. We have imagery with this. The verdict means the jury agreed with the Crown's case that the man murdered Grace Millane in his apartment after a Tinder date last December. Ms Millane's parents held hands as the judge, Justice Moore, thanked the jury for its service. Justice Moore told the jurors it had been a particularly difficult trial and discharged them from further jury service for 7 years. The man was remanded in custody for sentencing in February. The prosecution has finished presenting evidence in the High Court trial of a doctor accused of murdering Dunedin teenager Amber Rose Rush. Today the jury was played the police interview with Bernard Scanther, who denies killing the 16-year-old in February last year. The prosecution case is that he fatally stabbed Miss Rush to stop her making claims he was molesting minors and offering money for sex. Bernard Scanther was questioned 2 days after Miss Rush was killed. He told the detective, "We're now going to cross to the High Court in Auckland."
You'll have to forgive me because I'm not very good at this. The verdict of murder today will be welcomed by every member of the Millane family and friends of Grace. It will not reduce the pain, the suffering that we've had to endure for over the past year. Can't see it. Grace was taken away from us in the most brutal fashion a year ago, and our lives and family have been ripped apart. This will be with us for the rest of our lives. Grace was a beautiful, talented, loving daughter. Grace was our sunshine, and she will be missed forever. She did not deserve to be murdered in such a barbaric way on her OE year. We would like to thank several people. Auckland Police Force, been professional, diligent and thorough all through this investigation. A special thank you to Detective Inspector Scott Beard, Detective Senior Sergeant Greg Brand and Detective Tony Jordan. We would like to thank the Crown Prosecution team, Brian, Robin and Lita. They never flinched away from the more intimate details of the case and were compassionate and thoughtful where the family matters arose. The press contingent, you lot, who have attended court every day with my wife and I and reported truthfully, respectfully, all events as they unfolded. Last but not least, we would love to thank the people of New Zealand. They've opened their hearts to Grace and her family. I cannot express our gratitude enough for all the offers and gifts of kindness that we've received over the last year. Finally, we must return home and try and pick up the pieces of our lives and day to day without our beloved Grace. Thank you all.
That was David Millane, the father of Grace Millane, and Grace Millane's mother, Gillian Millane, outside the High Court in Auckland. To other news, an Auckland High School principal says he trusts his students and did not instruct them not to go to an organised inter-school brawl this afternoon. Last Friday, 8 people were arrested after a brawl at Mission Bay Reserve involving dozens of school students. Extra police have been sent to Mission Bay this afternoon after they found out there were plans for another meet-up today. It's NCEA exam period, so many older high schoolers are not in lessons. The principal of Otahuhu College, Neil Watson, says he trusts his students to make the right decisions.
There's no need to say it. The kids know what is right, they know what is wrong. And sometimes they make wrong decisions, and when they do, there's consequences.
Neil Watson, the principal of Otahuhu College in Auckland. The Department of Corrections says new terms for referring to inmates are not mandatory. Staff are referring to inmates by their first names, describing them as men in their care and using te reo word paihere for inmates, which means bundle. It's part of a new strategy which aims to humanise the inmates. The Department of Corrections Deputy Chief Executive for Māori, Tōpia Ramika, told Checkpoint that there is no directive for staff to use the words, but they are being told the terms are available. A prison staff body, the Corrections Association, has criticised the use of the terms, but Mr Ramika says it's the first time he's heard the criticism.
Based on my travel throughout the country over the last 2 months in terms of various prisons and community correction sites, I haven't heard that feedback directly.
Tōpia Ramika from the Department of Corrections. The death toll from Samoa's measles epidemic has risen to 20, with another 202 cases recorded in the past day. The government says there have been more than 1,644 cases since the outbreak began last month. Samoa has declared a state of emergency with schools closed, a mass vaccination campaign underway and public gatherings restricted. Nearly 150 people have been hospitalised, including 11 children who are in a critical condition. Almost 90% of the cases are on Samoa's main island, Upolu. Sweltering dry temperatures and possible heatwave conditions are being forecast for much of the country in coming weeks. The heatwave fuelling the devastating bushfires in Australia is drifting over the Tasman this weekend. Parts of the South Island had a scorcher today, with Timaru hitting 29 degrees. Chris Brandolino from Niwa says Hamilton, Inland Bay of Plenty and Canterbury and Wairarapa could get temperatures 12 degrees above their monthly average. He says much of the rest of the country is likely to get well above average temperatures, and there is also very little rain expected. Wainuamata Hill Road in Lower Hutt has reopened after a crash. A car rolled just before 3 o'clock this afternoon. Police say there were serious injuries. It's 7 minutes past 6. England have taken the key wicket of Black Cap skipper Kane Williamson to have the home side 128 for 4 as play draws towards a close on day 2 of the first cricket test at Bay Oval in Mount Maunganui. Williamson made 51, bringing up his 31st test 50, but fell the following delivery, caught in the slips off bowling by Sam Curran. The other New Zealand batsmen are out, with Jeet Raval, Tom Latham and Ross Taylor. England were dismissed earlier for 353, meaning New Zealand trail by 225 runs with 6 wickets in hand. Meanwhile, in Brisbane, Australia are in charge against Pakistan with the home side 195 for none at tea on day 2 in reply to Pakistan's first innings of 240. Injuries have struck the Black Ferns again ahead of the last Rugby Sevens tournaments of the year. The Black Ferns Sevens will be without Portia Woodman and Michaela Blyde for the Dubai and Cape Town legs of the World Sevens Series. An Achilles tendon injury kept Woodman out of the international game for a year before she returned at the Oceania Sevens tournament this month. However, she suffered a hamstring strain at the Fiji event, which will keep her out of the rest of the year. And the second oldest provincial rugby competition in New Zealand, Auckland's Roller Mills Primary School tournament, is to end. The tournament started in 1924. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Genji Cohen, creator of the Netflix phenomenon Orange is the New Black. We examine some symbols of resistance with the authors of a book about New Zealand's history of protest. And US bioethicist Professor Carl Elliott on how he helped expose a lethal experiment at his own university. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For all of the North Island, also Marlborough and Nelson, fine weather. Bulla, fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow with patchy drizzle morning and evening. Westland, rain developing in the south this evening. Occasional rain or drizzle further north tomorrow. Canterbury, fine at first. Norwesterly gales for exposed parts of the high country easing tonight. Becoming cloudy about the plains tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, fine and warm tonight. A few showers developing, some possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon and evening. Norwesterly gales in exposed places, severe in Southland, easing tonight. Fiordland, rain, heavy and possibly thundery at times. Severe norwesterly gales easing this evening. Chatham Islands, mainly fine tonight, becoming cloudy tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 10 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, the jury in the Grace Millane trial has found the man she met on a Tinder date guilty of murder. In the past 20 minutes, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury of 7 women and 5 men have found the 27-year-old guilty of Grace's murder in December last year. Grace's parents, David and Gillian Millane, have been in court every day of the 3-week trial, and a few minutes ago addressed the media outside court.
Grace was taken away from us in the most brutal fashion a year ago, and our lives have been, and family have been ripped apart. This will be with us for the rest of our lives. Grace was a beautiful, talented, loving daughter. Grace was our sunshine, and she will be missed forever. She did not deserve to be murdered in such a barbaric way on her OE year. We would like to thank several people. Auckland Police Force, been professional, diligent and thorough all through this investigation. A special thank you to Detective Inspector Scott Beard, Detective Senior Sergeant Greg Brand and Detective Tony Jordan. We would like to thank the Crown Prosecution team, Brian, Robin and Lita. They never flinched away from the more intimate details of the case and were compassionate and thoughtful where the family matters arose. The press contingent, you lot, who have attended court every day with my wife and I and reported truthfully, respectfully, all events as they unfolded. Last but not least, we would love to thank the people of New Zealand. They've opened their hearts to Grace and her family. I cannot express our gratitude enough for all the offers and gifts of kindness that we've received over the last year. Finally, we must return home and try and pick up the pieces of our lives and day to day without our beloved Grace. Thank you all.
And that was Grace Millane's father, David Millane, who spoke outside court with his wife, Gillian, at his side. Detective Inspector Scott Beard says the police won't be commenting at this time. But let's return now to our reporter, Sarah Robson, who's been covering the trial. Sarah, you were in court when the verdict was returned. Can you tell us a little bit about the atmosphere there and what happened?
Yeah, that's right. So the verdict came in not long after 5 o'clock this afternoon, about an hour ago now. So the public gallery wasn't as full as what it has been throughout a lot of this trial, but the jury came back and Grace Millane's parents, David and Gillian, who you just heard from there, they were sitting in the front row of the gallery as the jury's foreperson delivered that guilty of murder verdict. Now, they were holding hands and sort of were leaning on each other as they were waiting for that verdict to come in. Now, Grace Millane's mother, Gillian, she broke down in tears and sobbing as that guilty verdict came through. Now, the accused man, he was standing in the dock as that verdict was delivered. He appeared emotionless and left the courtroom fairly quickly, accompanied by his corrections officers.
And obviously David Millane has come out there and read a statement. You were there. Can you just talk us through again what he said and how he was?
Yeah, no, that was an incredibly emotional statement from David Millane. He was wiping tears from his eyes throughout that. Gillian Millane also incredibly emotional as well. David Millane was reading the statement from his phone. In it, he said that while they were pleased with this guilty verdict, it wasn't something that would bring their daughter back. They talked about the struggles that they've been facing over the last year, how difficult it has been to deal with their daughter's death. Mr. Millane said that their daughter didn't deserve to be murdered in a way like this. When she was out on her OE, we've heard that she'd arrived in New Zealand in late November last year as part of her, as many young people in New Zealand do, her big overseas trip after finishing university. Now, David Millane also thanked members of the police who were involved in the investigation from when this was just simply a missing persons investigation in early December after Grace Millane had been reported missing because her family hadn't heard from her after her birthday. And that obviously then progressed through to a homicide investigation and obviously the charging of the man who has now been found guilty of her murder. David Millane also thanked the Crown prosecutors as well as the media in New Zealand, who David Millane said had been covering this case truthfully and respectfully. And, David and Gillian Millane have been sitting in the public gallery for the entire duration of this 3-week trial, and at times they have appeared upset and emotional as some of that fairly harrowing evidence about what happened to their daughter has been read out in court to the jury.
Thank you, Sarah. That's our reporter, Sarah Robson, who's been covering the trial. She's outside the High Court in Auckland. The Grace Millane trial, which lasted 3 weeks, ended a year of heartache for the British backpackers family. Nita Blake-Person looks back on the case.
Grace Millane was on the trip of a lifetime when she disappeared in central Auckland on the eve of her 22nd birthday in December last year. She'd just finished university and, like many young people, she was off on her OE. On December the 1st, Ms Millane met up with a guy she'd matched with on Tinder. They went out for drinks and headed back to his apartment at the City Life Hotel. She was reported missing by her family after their happy birthday messages went unanswered. Her father, David, flew to New Zealand from the UK to help with the search for his daughter and fronted a police media conference.
Grace is a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, family-orientated daughter. Grace has never been out of contact for this amount of time. She's usually in daily contact with either her mother, myself, her 2 brothers, members of the family on social media.
But on December the 8th, the police announced they had charged a then 26-year-old man with Ms Millane's murder. The next day, Detective Inspector Scott Beard said her body was found buried in a suitcase in the Waitakere Ranges.
Since early this morning, we've had a scene examination underway here in the section of bush behind me. This area was identified late last night as a location of interest as a result of our investigative work. I can now advise that a short time ago we located a body which we believe to be Grace.
For the last 3 weeks, the 27-year-old man accused of murdering Ms Millane has been on trial in the High Court in Auckland. It was the Crown's case that the man strangled Ms Millane to death.
In this case, we've killed Grace Millane, the defendant. Gentleman over here at the back, behind me, had to have had her under his grip, suffocating her, if that's the right term, strangling her is probably the correct term, for a total of what would be approximately 5 to 10 minutes.
But the man's defence team said Ms Millane's death was an accident after he choked her during consensual rough sex.
The defence says to you that this is not a murder. It's a tragic, unintended, unforeseen accident.
During the trial, the Crown called evidence from almost 40 witnesses. One of them was forensic pathologist Simon Stables, who found significant bruising on the left side of Ms Millane's neck.
All I can say that it's been due to pressure on the neck, and that pressure has been applied for long enough for that bruising to occur, and with enough force for that bruising to occur.
That pressure to the neck was the cause of her death. The Crown told the jury that in the early hours of December the 2nd, the man Googled Waitakere Ranges and hottest fire, evidence they said that the man was making plans to dispose of her body. During his closing address, Prosecutor Brian Dickey showed the jury the 7 explicit photos the Crown said were taken after Ms Millane died.
He has eroticised the death of British backpacker Grace Millane, which occurred under his handhold and on her birthday.
Another woman who met the accused on Tinder told the jury about what had happened when she went back to his apartment and gave him oral sex. She said he suffocated her, putting his full weight on her. Her words have been voiced.
There were so many thoughts running through my mind, but it was more that this can't be the way that I die.
The jury watched hours of CCTV footage showing Ms Millane and the man on their Tinder date in Auckland CBD, bar hopping and drinking heavily. At one bar, the man pulls her closer and they kiss. They headed back to the City Life Hotel. They looked cosy as they walked through the lobby and into the lift. It was the last time Ms Millane was seen alive. The jury also watched the man's 2 interviews with the police. In the first interview, he lied about what happened that night.
Hey, I just want to ask a question. Have I been arrested for something I didn't do?
You haven't been arrested, mate.
I was like, holy shit.
But CCTV footage from the days after Ms Millane's death showed him going to the warehouse to buy a suitcase, picking up cleaning products from the supermarket, renting a car and hiring a carpet cleaner. Almost exactly 24 hours after Ms Millane was seen going into the City Life Hotel, the man put a suitcase with her body in it on a baggage trolley, wheeled it into the lift and took it out to the car. The next morning he drove to the Waitakere Ranges and buried it in a shallow grave. In his second police interview, the man told police he woke up and found Ms Millane's body on the floor of his apartment. He dialed 111.
I didn't hit the button because I was scared how bad it looked.
Why did you think it looked bad?
Well, there's a dead person in my room.
He agreed to lead detectives to Ms Millane's body, but answered no to this question.
Did you kill Grace Millane? Okay. You're under arrest for the murder of Grace Millane on or about the 2nd of December.
The man's defence lawyer, Ron Mansfield, said no matter what Ms Millane's sexual preferences were, she was not to blame for what happened. Mr Mansfield said the accused man's actions after Ms Millane's death didn't tell them anything about what happened in the room where she died.
Other than tell you that he was involved, panicked out of fear of the consequences and a fear that no one was going to believe him. It doesn't tell you anything about what this couple were doing.
Ms Millane's parents, David and Gillian Millane, have been in court for the entire trial. For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
It's almost 22 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Authorities in Samoa say 20 people have now died in the country's measles epidemic as it tells all unvaccinated pregnant women to stay home and not go to work. The Samoa Red Cross says it's administered 1,300 vaccines in the last 2 days. The country's authorities have forbidden all people below the age of 19 to board vessels travelling between the 2 main islands. The Red Cross's disaster management coordinator Lauvao e Sare e Ose told our reporter Alex Perrottet that people are lining up in their hundreds for vaccines.
So far we have reached up to more than 1,300 people.
And that's just this week?
Just this week, yes.
Right, so we've probably seen some big queues of people waiting up outside your base to get the jab.
Yes. It's just queue up starting from 8 a.m. and the queue just queued up maybe till 12 or 1 p.m. Then it started to slow down its process. But all throughout the morning until lunchtime, people are still queuing up for the vaccination.
And how do people feel there? What's the vibe of these parents that are bringing their children to be immunised?
We do believe that we all have the same sense and also think that they value what is going on, and also a bit worried about the situation at the moment due to the cases that has been now raised, more than 1,000, and also the fatalities of these 16 already been discovered with this measles outbreak. So it just built the awareness in our public and the people to turn up and make sure that they can get the vaccination for their children.
So the public awareness campaign certainly ramping up, and of course, tragic as it is, 16 people have died. I guess that itself is such a strong message to people to go and get those vaccines, right?
Yes, that's true. It's really a strong push, and also consider the age group. It's really high risk with the children. So all the parents are making that time to drop in, starting from Wednesday and then yesterday until today. People are still queuing up from the morning till the noon.
How long do you intend to keep doing this?
The original plan with the government is still going up next week. Up for 2 weeks for the urban area before we look at the rural areas where the less vulnerable sites or the locations. But this is just for the urban area. So I guess also why the people are queuing up in our location due to the fact that our office is right in the middle of the most populated urbanization site.
You'll be going out to the more urban areas and across to Savaii as well. Will you take those vaccines to those remote places?
Yes, it's also going to be the same.
Now, your Secretary-General, Namulaulu Tautala Mawala, is with Prime Minister Tuilaepa today. So what's their plan? What are they doing?
At the moment, the meeting is still in progress. So it's past 5 p.m. now, but we're still waiting for them. What's the end outcome of the meeting? And maybe we can see what's the next step from now on.
Okay, and what else are you? What sort of precautions or even rules are being put in place there? We heard that all pregnant women have been told don't turn up to work unless you're sure that you've been immunised. Is that the case, and are there other rules as well?
Yes, it's an order under the state of emergency to reinforce the pregnant women to stay home, so to relieve from work, either if it's the government or the public sector, all reinforced for the whole country for pregnant women. And even for the domestic travel from Mulifanua to the Salelolonga Wharf. So every child or every kid's around 19 years of age, lower or below 19 years of age, are restricted from travelling for both islands.
Once this campaign is finished and people are vaccinated, do you feel there is sufficient faith in the system, the ongoing health system there for regular vaccinations? We know that the problem happened because of the issue last year where 2 children died. It was human error in the application of those vaccines, the mixing of the vaccines. Do you think that people in Samoa have their faith restored in the Ministry of Health to be able to stick with the system from here on?
We had some incidents last year, but at the moment we are starting to get back that trust and also building the confidence within our people. So it's really a good sign where we can work and pull ourselves together.
That was Lauva'o Esare e Ose from Samoa's Red Cross talking to Alex Perete. And the latest from Samoa, 20 people have died, 147 are currently in hospital, including 11 children who are in a critical condition. More New Zealand firefighters leave the country today on their way to Queensland to continue the battle against wildfires burning there. This afternoon we'll see a crew of 21 join efforts in the state, replacing a group that will be coming home to New Zealand on Sunday. Sunday. Fires are continuing to rage across Australia's eastern states, with toxic smoke clogging the air across Sydney and other cities, and lightning strikes from isolated storms threaten to start new fires. The BBC's Sydney correspondent Phil Mercer reports.
For the first time in almost a decade, a code red warning was issued in the Australian state of Victoria. Record-breaking spring temperatures and strong winds have conspired to raise the alert to its highest level. Residents in the danger zone were told it was too late to leave as large fires burnt out of control.
At the moment, we've got more than 60 fires that have happened across the state. It's important to point out at this particular point in time that we still have a long way to go.
There were apocalyptic scenes in the city of Mildura when a huge dust storm combined with thick smoke turned the sky a ghastly shade of orange. In South Australia, changing weather conditions are allowing firefighters to slowly contain a blaze that's engulfed several homes on the York Peninsula. The impact on wildlife may never be known.
We're finding a lot of birds and snakes and koalas that are burnt. In some of the areas, the heat was so intense that all the big eucalypt trees were literally incinerated.
In New South Wales, 6 people have died in the fires in recent weeks, and more than 600 homes have been destroyed. About 60 blazes are burning in the nation's most populous states. Half are uncontained. Smoke from the bushfires has again blanketed Sydney with a toxic haze. Authorities in Australia's biggest city have also announced the toughest water restrictions in 10 years as a long drought worsens and reservoir levels continue to fall.
And that was Phil Mercer in Sydney. Just before we go, an interview with the Corrections Department Deputy CEO Māori on the issue of calling prisoners by their first name will go up on our webpage and Facebook page. We didn't have time for that this evening because of the verdict in the Millane case. And also Marama Davidson, we had to cut that interview with her short. The long version, the full version will go up online also. Thanks for joining us. We will catch you next week.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The father of British backpacker Grace Millane has made an emotional statement after the 27-year-old man accused of murdering her was found guilty. Outside the High Court in Auckland, David Millane said the verdict will be welcomed by every member of the Millane family and friends of Grace, but will not reduce the pain and suffering they have endured in the past year.
Grace was taken away from us in the most brutal fashion a year ago, and our lives and family have been ripped apart. This will be with us for the rest of our lives. Grace was a beautiful, talented, loving daughter. Grace was our sunshine.